Hi everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar on all things exosomes. So the number one trending ingredient in the industry at the moment. Today we will be discussing on how we make exosomes work for cosmetic formulations. A little bit of housekeeping before we move on to the presentation itself. So you should all be able to see the Q&A box where you can enter your questions throughout the webinar, and then we will have some time for a Q&A at the end. You should also be able to see a chat box as well. So feel free to click on the chat box, tell us where you're joining from, what are you drinking whilst we listen through to these presentations, and of course get to know each other a little bit as well. There's probably colleagues already on the call and that you're already familiar with in the industry. We will also have a couple of polls throughout the presentation. So please participate, stay engaged, interact with us, and then we will be able to hopefully give you all the information that you're looking for throughout today's webinar. So I'm Cam, I'm the founder of the Cosmetic Regulator. I'm a UK and European responsible person for all cosmetic products. This is a really interesting topic for me because I know exosomes can do such amazing things, and translating that into regulatory and compliant claims can be challenging, but we will be discussing that today. As we've already mentioned, today's focus is all about making exosomes work in cosmetic formulations and trying to remain compliant when doing so. I am just going to move over to the agenda. So we will be looking over, setting the stage, the exosome landscape, where things are at now. Then we will have a couple of polls. We will then be going over what we're calling the smarter alternatives, Exometics G, and then discussing all things on the future. What does the future hold for science communication technologies before moving on to the Q&A session? Today's webinar is a collaborative webinar between Algaktiv and Covalo. Covalo is the world's largest data platform for the consumer goods industry, with more than 80,000 ingredients listed just in personal care. Covalo is making the industry more sustainable, transparent, and innovative. Algaktiv is a leading innovator in sustainable skincare biotechnology, specializing in high-performance active ingredients derived from wild microalgae. Their work combines cutting-edge science with a deep respect for biodiversity, offering clean, conscious solutions for today's skincare brands. So I am now going to pass over to Marina first and then Jordi to introduce themselves. I won't duplicate and reintroduce myself. So Marina, would you like to take over?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kamal. Hello, everyone. I am Marina. I am delighted to be here today with you. I'm originally from Brazil, and my background is in pharmacy, cosmetic engineer, and product management. Over the years, I've carved out a path as a consultant for the cosmetic industry, working closely with brands to help them discover their unique voice and bring their product ideas to life in a coherent and a compelling way. What truly drives me is my passion for natural ingredients, researching their potential and weaving that knowledge into thoughtful cosmetic applications. I also enjoy writing and sharing insights with the broader beauty community through articles. I'm the founder of Tupi Beleza and a cosmetic lab consultant lab that I launched in France, and today I'm based in the Netherlands. Jordi, please, you can go.
Thank you, Marina. Hi, everyone. So super happy to be here. I'm connecting from Barcelona in Spain. And I'm a biologist by training. So I did my master's in molecular biotechnology, and my final thesis was actually about tissue engineering. So there, I really fell in love with, complexity and the intelligence of the skin as a living system. And from there, I jumped into skincare, and I've been with Algaktiv for the past 8 years. I started in sales and marketing, and now I'm focused on product development. So basically, my part in this discussion today is going to be to dive into the science behind exosomes, and hopefully to share with you how we can move from this buzz, this hype, to the biology. So thank you everyone for being here, and Kamal, back to you.
Perfect, thank you so much. So moving on to setting the stage, let's have a look at the exosome landscape, what exosomes are, why are they trending, and where things currently stand and what the future holds as well. So Marina, I know you have, you as a formulator, you know exosomes really well. So would you like to take us through what exosomes actually are?
Yes, sure. I'm gonna do that happily. Exosomes, I'm gonna do in a very general way. I could spend hours talking about it, but I'm gonna do very general. Exosomes are very tiny, naturally released vesicles by cells, originally from animal source. They carry proteins, lipids, and genetic material like RNA. And their job is to deliver these to other cells. They are great communicators, triggering repair and regeneration. In skincare, vegan versions are put in advance, aiming the use to promote, for example, collagen production, reduce inflammation, accelerate healing in general. Although they are very popular, there are gray zones in compliance and stability. Exosomes are being hailed as a gentle, with a more target efficacy than other ingredients, improving, of course, cell-to-cell communication. Instead of forcing your skin to react, exosomes are going to help them and remind them how to function better like a younger, healthier skin or cell.
Perfect. Thank you very much for taking us through that. And I think one thing that we also wanted to touch on is to explore why exosomes are trending. Everyone seems to be releasing an exosome-based product at the moment in the skincare industry, but exosomes are actually very popular in medicinal and clinical applications. And there is now a need to translate exosomes from that medicinal application to the more cosmetic skincare application, because consumers want these benefits. They want to have really high performing, innovative skincare to actually get some really good results. And there is a need also in the industry to have more sustainable and vegan and obviously high quality ingredients in skincare formulations. There is a need to have all of that efficacy and have it in a gentle way as well. But as we go through today's webinar, it will become quite clear how, I guess, innovative and complex exosomes can be and why they are so popular and what they can bring to skincare formulations. I will pass over to Geordie just to add any additional context around why, from a raw material supply perspective, you're finding exosomes are trending. There is more of a need from it from your clients and consumer base.
Is I think it perfectly captures the moment we're in, right? I mean, exosomes are everywhere. So right now it's our job to kind of translate this consumer need into something that makes sense from a science perspective, right? Because this is, in my experience at least, it's been one of the most driven trend, but that comes from the end consumer, right? I mean, if you look at TikTok, exosomes are everywhere. You start seeing these Korean-inspired rituals that use exosomes for these medical skincare treatments, right? For tissue engineering, for cell therapy. right? So it's not just being pushed by brands or raw material players, it's actually being pulled by the final consumer, right? So I think this interest is organic, and you just have to type exosomes into TikTok to really fall into this rabbit hole, right? So we ask yourself, I mean, we need to ask ourselves, how can we bring clarity to this noise, right? And I think exosomes first, of course, yeah, they bring the marketing discussion on the table, but I think the science discussion is actually very relevant, right? I think these structures, which, as Marina mentioned, these are communication vesicles that our cells produce naturally to send actives from one another, right? So there's an insight here that we can use for skincare, right? I think it's similar to the breakthrough that liposomes brought 40 years ago, when we started using them to encapsulate actives and make them more stable and penetrate better. These are actually more complex delivery systems that we ourselves have been using forever, right? So now it's time to translate that science into skincare, but of course, I mean, we need to do it in the right ways. So I think that's what I really hope that we explore today. I mean, how we went from this hype to science in our own development journey, and of course, how can we help the industry build trust and transparency around this fascinating and promising, but also very complex space.
Thank you, Jordi. And Marina, from a formulator's perspective, are you also seeing that more brands, manufacturers are approaching you to formulate with exosomes because they are such a trending ingredient at the moment?
Yes, Kamal, I have clients touching the point, but at the same time, they are still doubtful also in terms of exporting and the different regulations around how this could be compliant in different places and borders, right? But yeah, the interest is getting higher and higher. And after the last big show that I was in, it was a big there was a big boom, and it was also in that moment that I saw these ingredients for the first time that we are talking today. And it was for me first moment to be in touch and learn more, and also to have enough information to share with my clients and make them feel a little bit more comfortable with going with new technologies.
Great, thank you. And Marina touched on a really good point there with regards to how we formulate with exosomes, but in a compliant way. And that is something we will be digging into a little bit more, a little bit later in the webinar. For now, what we would like to do is introduce a poll that you can all be involved with. And this is just a general question. How much do you know about exosomes? At the moment, nothing really. You're just starting your research. You understand them fully. You only see exosomes as a cosmetics trend, or perhaps something else. And let us know in the chat. It'd be really interesting to gauge from the audience what you guys already know about exosomes. So please, you should have a poll that you can select an answer to. Okay, I can see some answers coming through. Okay, so it looks like half of the people that have answered are just starting their research. And this is a great webinar if you are just starting your research, because we are obviously introducing the topic, introducing the ingredient group, and having a discussion around not only a specific raw material, but the regulations around exosomes as a whole and formulating with exosomes. The next most popular answer was people don't know anything yet. And again, that's fine. This is the purpose of this webinar, to give you some knowledge, to start that understanding of exosomes. There are a small percentage of you that believe that exosomes are just a cosmetics trend, and I'm sure Jordi will be more than happy to sort of dispute that point a little bit later in the webinar as we go through his slides. So thank you so much for interacting with that poll. It's a great way to understand the audience and what your understanding is. But it looks like everyone is pretty much either don't know or they're just starting their research. A small number of you do understand them fully, which it'd be great to get some questions from that group of people. I think it'd be really good to have that discussion as well towards the end of the webinar. So we are going to now turn to sourcing and alternatives. So when we think about exosome sourcing, there are a number of, I guess, criteria that you will be looking out for around being vegan, cruelty-free, whether they're sustainably and ethically sourced, self-assembled, for example. I will pass over to Geordie to just take you through a few of these criteria and why they're important when it comes to exosomes, as obviously many in the space at the moment are animal derived, which causes some issues not only from a formulation perspective, but also a compliance and branding perspective as well.
These few slides that are just upcoming, we're going to be answering a lot of the questions that we have already in the chat, which is basically around sourcing. Right? I think this is the key topic when discussing exosome technologies, which is, all right, we need to acknowledge that this is all coming from an animal-derived active, right? The exosomes that we all know of and the ones that we studied, right? These are animal-derived exosomes. These are the ones we want that we cannot have in skincare, right? So of course they are the perfect active ingredient when it comes to performance because they have this true exosomal structure, which as Marina mentioned, and if you remember this illustration that was in that slide, an exosome is basically a lipidic based vesicle, right? Which means it has this lipidic membrane with a very specific composition when it comes to this lipid ratio that's actually mimicking the lipid membrane composition of our own cells, right? So it has this complex and rich lipidic structure, but also not only this, it has these transmembrane proteins, these lipids, these structures in the membrane that itself that actually are these GBS signaling, right? There are these molecules, these proteins that are going to be targeting the exosomes, right? Are going to be delivering the exosome load into the exact recipient, right? And this is because these proteins, they act as these keys that will open the doors on the membranes of the recipient cell, right? So basically, one of the questions is actually, what's the difference between exosomes and peptides, right? I mean, peptides, they tap on these targeted delivery because they can engage with some membrane receptors in our skin. Exosomes have those peptides integrated in their membranes, right? So the structure is key when discussing exosomes. It's not just a vesicle, it's a very rich lipidic vesicle with these complex structures in the membrane, right? And of course, on the inside, this is where the bioactives are going to be, right? We're talking about growth factors, we're talking about DNA repair enzymes, we're talking about antioxidants. This is a very rich blend of actives that our cells encapsulate and send to a neighbor cell. So the structure itself is key when discussing exosomes. And I think if we move to the vegan alternatives, right, which is the next slide, we're going to see how it's a key criteria that we need to take into account when defining what's an exosome and what's not. So here it's what we've been seeing lately in the skincare industry, which are the vegan alternatives that have been popping up, right? Of course, I mean, this is a very simplistic definition of every category, so happy to engage in a more in-depth debate, but this is just an overview of the key features of each category, right? So of course, if we talk about vegan alternatives for animal-derived exosomes, we need to start talking about the natural vegan exosomes, right? That means all these exosomes that are produced by vegan organisms, meaning plant cells, microalgae, bacteria, fungi, right? Yeast, all these organisms that they produce their own exosomes, and there are true exosomes in structure. But of course, there's going to be a limiting factor that's going to be the biocommunication aspect, right? These exosomes are designed to communicate to their own species, right? They're not designed to talk to a fibroblast in our skin. They're going to have performance because, of course, I mean, these are highly bioactive constructs, but they will not have the biocommunication aspect to them. So even though there are exosomes, they lack these cell-to-cell or skin communication aspect. The next category is the exosome-like or the false vegan exosomes. These are easily recognized because they have lecithins in the inkinase, right? These are, and if you've heard about them, these were launched immediately after the trend kicked in, right? I mean, some of the suppliers out there to just, revamped old active, or they just launched extracts out there calling them exosomes, right? Or exosome-like. From a marketing perspective, I mean, that's okay. From a scientific perspective, they lack the robustness of an exosome in both in terms of structure and functionality, right? So first, they will not be targeted because they will lack this exosomal structure. And of course, I mean, you cannot consume as exosomes if they have lecithins in them, right? Because that means it's just a liposome, maybe a smaller, a more complex liposome, but still a liposome. And that leaves us with the third vegan group, which is the biomimetic approaches, which there's a few of them in the market. And this approach is basically acknowledging that we want to have the animal-derived exosomes, right? I mean, this is what we want in terms of performance because they are the ones that are optimized to talk to our own skin, but we cannot use them because of the sourcing, right? So the biomimetic approach is actually based on using vegan biomasses, right? So vegan building blocks to recreate, to bioengineer these animal-derived exosomes in the lab, right? So these are not naturally produced. These are recreated in the lab, but they mimic the structure of an animal-derived exosome. And that's the powerful insight. They will have all the performance, so the structure, the functionality, this ability to target our own cells, but without any constraint when it comes to sourcing, right? Because if you use a vegan biotech platform, this is going to be sustainable, this is going to be vegan, cruelty-free, super scalable, and very consistent when in terms of production as well, right? So this is the approach we took at Algaktiv, and this is the approach that we're going to be discussing today. How, by using vegan biomimetic exosomes, we can achieve animal-derived exosome performance without compromising on regulatory, on the branding, and even formulation stability.
Great, thank you, Jordi. And thinking about alternatives, that does lead us on to our next poll, which is asking you, the audience, whether you have found an exosome alternative that has enough scientific background for you to use. So let us know if you have found an alternative. If you haven't done any research yet, you haven't found a suitable alternative, or you're currently not interested in exosome alternatives. So we'll give you a moment just to answer the second poll, and I will pull up the results as you are answering those. Okay. So again, about half of the answers that we've received haven't done any research. And obviously one of the first steps of research in exosomes is attending this webinar. The second most popular answer is that you have found an alternative. So that's really interesting that some of the audience members have actually found an alternative to use. A small number of the audience haven't found a suitable alternative. And then a couple of people are not interested in exosome alternatives at the moment. So a mix of answers, but interesting to see that some audience members have actually found an alternative. So I'm guessing a lot of you will have questions comparing the alternative you have found versus the ingredient that Jordi will be talking about in a moment. So thank you for your interaction and answers on that second poll. So that does lead us to, I guess, one of the main points of the webinar, talking about a smarter alternative. So Algaktiv's Exometics G, which Geordie will be talking through and presenting on. So please, as Geordie does go through his slides, send us your questions and we will have time to answer those towards the end of the webinar. But I will hand over the floor again to Geordie to discuss Exometics G.
Great. So let's just get into it. So as I was mentioning, I mean, the biomimetic approach is the one we took when thinking about this exosome marketing trend, right? I mean, I saw a couple of people answering that this is just a marketing trend. I think it's a good marketing trend, but it's not just a marketing trend. I think technologically, there's been a lot of good research that has been done because of this marketing trend, right? So we have to acknowledge this. And one of the examples that are, the scientific research that has been done on this is the platform that I'm going to be discussing with you today, which is the Exometics platform. So today we're going to be discussing about one of the ingredients within this platform. But as a platform, we've developed a system that allows us to use lipidic-based microalgae. So microalgae that have a very specific lipidic membrane composition and turn them into biomimetic exosomes, right? So we have patented this process, which basically reorganizes the structure of the microalgae biomass to create biomimetic exosomes, which at the end are vesicles, right? Tiny vesicles that are going to be designed and bioengineered to replicate these animal exosomes of reference. So of course, as a platform, I mean, we're talking about microalgae, so this is completely vegan and naturally safe, highly potent due to the amazing biochemical composition of microalgae, right? As you know, microalgae are these unicellular organisms, which are the ancestors of all the photosynthetic life on Earth. So they have this very rich biochemistry within them. We like to call them, the original stem cells when it comes to the plant kingdom, right? Because they are living in nature just by themselves. So they're going to be highly potent, but of course they're going to be unlimited when it comes to manufacturing, right? We can grow them in photobioreactors. We can control every parameter, right? So it's going to be very consistent. We can control how the biomass is grown. We can control its composition. We control the exometics manufacturing process. So the end product, which is going to be these biomimetic exosomes in suspension, is going to be 100% standardized, right? So taking as an example the Exometics G product, which is the one we're going to be discussing today. If you ask for a certificate of analysis, the number of vesicles is standardized, the size of the vesicles is standardized, so we can control every parameter. And this is thanks to the patented process that it's shown here, which basically is mimicking the natural formation of exosomes in our own skin cells, right? So on the left side, you have a very summarized version of what the exosome formation looks like, right? So first, there's a first invagination of the membrane of the producing cell, right? So you have this first big invagination, which creates what's called the endosome, right? So the endosome is going to be a big vesicle within the cytoplasm of the cell, which will have secondary invaginations, which will form the exosomes on the inside of this endosome, right? So as you can see, these small vesicles are going to be formed and stored in this endosome. And when the time comes to release them, the endosome is going to be fusing with the membrane of the cell once again and releasing those exosomes to the extracellular matrix, right? So these exosomes can find their recipient cell, right? Which is going to be another cell. So basically, as a concept, an exosome is a rearrangement of the membrane of the mother cell which create these vesicles, which pack the content of the cell itself. Right? So we took this concept and we applied it into microalgae biotech. So by using this specific microalgae species, we can recreate this process and create biomimetic exosomes, which will have the same composition as a human exosome of reference. Right? This we can do first, of course, selecting the right microalgae species, but also within this process of formation of these biomimetic exosomes, we can optimize the composition of the biomass, right? So we can make them look as a very similar copy of what an exosome, a human exosome, looks like, right? And you can see here a very summarized list of the main 5 structural building blocks of an exosome. So starting from the lipid bilayer membrane, the specific lipids composition, the lipid rafts, which are floating in the membrane, these transmembrane proteins, which are these GPS signals that I was mentioning at the beginning, right? That are going to be targeting and delivering these exosomes to the right cell. And of course, there's exosome biogenesis proteins, right? So these are proteins that help with the formation of the vesicle itself, but also with their stability, right? These are super robust vesicles. And I think formulation is one of the key topics here. So I'm looking forward to this discussion with Marina. And last but not least, we have the functional cargo proteins. These are the actives themselves, right? A very rich blend of antioxidant enzymes, growth factors, DNA repair enzymes, super rich regenerative bioactive blend, which is packed within these vesicles, which, as I mentioned, are completely standardized, right? Particle size, 150 nanometers, and a concentration of more than 10 billion vesicles per milliliter. So we're not just saying that exosomatic G looks like an exosome, we're proving that it works as an exosome. This is a very exciting study, which, by the way, we just received this data a couple of days ago. This is a gene array which is basically comparing the performance of Exosomatic G against human fibroblast exosomes that we source from Korea. So these are the real ones, right? These are the ones that we want to have in our product, right? These are the ones that created the hype. And we tested them on human dermal fibroblasts, and then we kind of mapped the the gene profile activation of these 2 products. And as you can see, they look like a copy of each other, right? There's an almost perfect match when it comes to this gene modulation performance on key genes of skin matrix remodeling, immunity system, and even fibroblast differentiation, right? So we're looking at this functional biomimetism that's backed by the structural biomimetism. So this is, in our opinion, biomimetism at its best. We're not just saying that it looks like it, we're proving that it works like them. So of course, I mean, this product was specifically designed to match a human fibroblast exosome, so it has an amazing performance when it comes to increasing fibroblast metabolism, right? In a wound healing study, in only 8 hours, we're pretty much able to double the regenerative power of fibroblasts in this scratch test. And of course, how does this translate into skincare claims, right? I mean, at the end, this is what we're all looking for. So we did this first 2% clinical study. It's a very simple cream containing 2% Exosomatic G, and it's a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized study. So what we see here is the application of the product after 14 days and 28 days. So specifically, if we look at the wrinkle depth reduction, there's a very visible, even without filters, right? This bottom image, which shows these expression lines on the forehead of one of the volunteers, just basically disappearing after 14 days. But when measured by PRIMO, so 3D profilometry, we see these statistically significant benefits in wrinkle depth reduction. And this product even has a mechanical lifting effect, right? So speaking about regeneration, this active is able to physically lift the jawline contour. So it's basically measuring the distance between the jawline and 3 different reference points on the face of the volunteers. And Exomatic G, as you can see here, it's able to lift and physically create this lifting effect. Now, if we talk about renewal, we need to talk about skin smoothness, right? So this active is going to be able to renew the skin. And of course, this will have an impact on skin smoothness, even on the volunteers that have, this very nice and smooth skin at day 0, right? The contrast will be the skin looks smoother. And of course, it will help reflect light better. So the smoother the skin surface, the higher is going to be the radiance, as you'll see. So the skin radiance is increased by day 14, but of course, until day 56, we keep seeing the increase. So the product performance is not plateauing. And even with hyperpigmentation, you can see these visible results without, again, any filter on it. So 28 days, fairly fast performance when it comes to hyperpigmentation, and you can see that benefit with just your naked eye. And now I think here is where the discussion is going to get interesting. So I'm opening up to Marina and Kamal to jump in. But as a broad concept, the active was designed to be global compliant. So it has 2 different versions when it comes to inky names. One which holds the extract China registered inky, and then one that's going to be the PCPC registered inky name with vesicles in it. So I think having this inky name assigned by the PCPC, it just proves that we're not just one other supplier working on, extracts, but we're really putting the work to create a very differentiated active that can speak up to the customer and saying, these are really biomimetic exosomes that will deliver the benefits that you're looking for.
Great. Thank you very much, Jordi, for taking us through that data on Exomatic G and I guess how much of an amazing ingredient it is when used in skincare formulations. So talking about the actual formulation, as we can see on the slide here, the tested levels are between 1 to 2%. So that's the ideal level that we would be putting into a formulation. I'm going to now hand over to Marina to discuss, formulating with this ingredient. Are there any best practices that we should be keeping an eye out for, and how easy or perhaps difficult would it actually be to formulate with this ingredient, Marina?
Well, I'm very excited, waiting for my sample. But even before being invited to be part of this discussion today, I was already looking Exomatic G because I have some concepts that I will need to apply it. And I also know that they have a very nice formulation guide. But talking specifically about this ingredient, we, as Jordi was just saying, it's a lipidic vesicle. So it's important to highlight that it's better or not suitable, better not to use, or not suitable in formulas that are only oil, because then the vesicles, they will open up. But however, it is a completely dispersible in water-based and alcohol-based formulations, which make it highly versatile in different cosmetic form applications, like serums, creams, different types of formulas. What stands out for me looking into Exomatic G formulation guide is mostly that they tested a lot with homogenization And these vesicles are so robust that they will survive, and they will survive up to 8,000 RPMs. So this is quite strong force, and you can easily disperse it in a water-based formulation with these RPMs. Being vesicles that are still need a little bit attention in formulation, we suggest the use of them in the end of the formulation as a great active ingredient, below 40 degrees, as also a lot of other ingredients should be added in the formulation. So no much attention needs to be done. It's just normal formulation with active ingredients. In terms of pH, they suggest they use in between 6.5 and 8.5. And also the recommended usage level is in between 1 to 5%, having the clinical trials done at 2%. Something else that I noticed is that they tested with different bases and emulsifiers, and with hydrogels, non-ionic, PEG-based emulsifiers, and natural emulsifiers, these vesicles are safe. These exosomes that are more than vesicles, right? They have this complex membrane, and they can also be used together with sunscreens and a lot of other ingredients, of course. Yeah, Kamal, I think although a delicate ingredient, it's not going to be tricky to apply in the lab. I'm looking forward for my sample.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Marina, and hopefully gives the audience confidence around how much of an easy and flexible ingredient it is to use in a variety of chassis. I think one question that I have from a regulatory perspective for Jordi is on the global INCI name. So obviously we have PCPC for the US, we're registered in China. Are there any plans to add the INCI name to Cosing?
Yes, of course. So here it's uncharted territory for us, right? I mean, this is an INCI name that was not described before. So these vesicles coming from microalgae. So the same way that we applied for the new PCPC INCI name, we will consider applying it across the board in European regulation bodies as well. So absolutely.
Amazing. That's good news, and obviously gives the audience confidence around compliance in the UK and Europe as well. So as I promised at the start of the webinar, we did say that we will be doing a bit more of a deep dive into the regulatory aspects and the formulation aspects of the ingredient, and basically what the future holds for skin communication technologies, whether that be from a formulation perspective or from a compliance perspective. Obviously, when using supplier data, that does come with its own challenges, especially for somebody in my position who is reviewing claims from a brand and they want to talk about skin regeneration and erasing wrinkles. It's great that we have that data from a supplier, but unfortunately the regulations haven't exactly caught up with the skincare innovation technologies that we have from a wide range of raw materials. So we do have to tread carefully almost around what we say about what exosomes can do. Obviously claims such as, radiance and improving the appearance of hyperpigmentation, etc., they're perfectly acceptable cosmetic claims. It's where we have those stronger claims around sort of cell communication, skin regeneration, and those physiological actions. How can brands incorporate that technology in their claims and how they talk about their ingredients with their consumers? So I will put that question to Jordi first, and then perhaps Marina will probably build on it from a formulator's perspective.
So I think first here is, and I love this concept of skin communication technologies. I think we're just right now scratching the surface. I think the exosome trend, the marketing push is just, the catalyst of innovation, and I think more technology will come on that front. So of course, I mean, right now it's our job to really put the criteria on the table. I think one of the lacking of regulation right now from our end is, there's a lot of marketing that's been done in exosomes and not enough regulation from an ingredient supplier perspective, right? So even though we've done all this work and all this research to really deliver on the claims that we're kind of selling, there's of course a lack of regulation for other actives, which we've looked at, and they're not delivering what they are actually proposing, right? So I think the first step will be to create kind of working group, I don't know, regulation on exosomes or exosome in communication technologies, as you said, which I think will provide clarity for brands to say, all right, so if I use this ingredient, I can claim I have an exosome. If I use this ingredient, I can claim I have a biomimetic exosome. And maybe if I use this ingredient, I cannot claim anything, right? Which I think is something that's lacking right now.
Yes, definitely. And I think just to add to that as well, when including the ingredient from a regulatory perspective, we want to ensure that the ingredient is actually present in the formulation at the amount to give the consumer the claimed benefit. So looking towards the formulation. Marina, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
I completely agree with both of you. I think it's a matter of time. I think also, in terms of talking about market readiness, clinical trials are there. There is a technology patented behind, for example, in this case. And there is also other ingredients that are very much based in the technology and the science. And comparing with others that might be not so much in the technology, but more surfing a wave of trends, let's say like that. And it's important to have the space to make the difference in between these type of ingredients, specifically for claiming and to differentiate one from the other. And I think this is going to be where the technology, these communications are going to grow. We need more regulations to be able to position them differently.
Exactly. The regulatory landscape needs to almost catch up with the innovation that we're seeing in the industry. And it's something that I sort of struggle with brands sometimes. They want to make these amazing claims and the data is there, but the regulations just haven't caught up. And then the last thing we want to happen is any sort of non-compliant claims being on the market, because even though exosomes come from that medical, clinical application, it is very easy to creep into that area when making claims on some cosmetic products. So yeah, brands do really need to watch out, but at the same time, be very careful about what they're communicating, how they're communicating it, and the language used and that terminology, because exosomes can do incredible things, as Geordie has talked us through, and having that in your formulation will definitely give the consumer some amazing benefits. It's just how do we communicate around that in a compliant way, and how do we formulate around that to make sure that the benefit is actually going to reach the consumer as well. So Geordie, I don't know if you had any other builds that you wanted to cover, whether that be regards to sourcing or Marina around perhaps stability as well, because I know a couple of questions are coming through around that.
I think just as an end point for our story is that we, as we just mentioned, there's this lack of regulation, which we're pushing from our end. So basically, we're working with a French working group, which is called CBIOS, which is trying to set up the foundation for defining what's biomimetic and what's not, right? I mean, biomimetic is one of these other marketing concepts that in cosmetics we use very lightly. You get all these biomimetic, bio-inspired, right? Which are often and pretty much more than we want it to be, are more marketing based than scientifically based, right? So we're working with this group to really set the foundations of what can be considered a biomimetic exosome in the skincare industry, and hopefully this will lead to more firm bargain in this regard as well.
Yes, definitely. Any builds from yourself, Marina, before we move on to Q&A?
No, I think we can move on. I agree with you too, 100%. Nothing else to top up.
Perfect. So we're going to move on to the Q&A, and I have seen many questions coming through. So let's have a look. First question, does it exist exosomes from plants, meaning from a vegetable source? I think we've answered this in that Exomimetics G is a vegan raw material. So Jordi, I don't know if you want to build on that.
I think yes. I mean, they exist, obviously, not just from plants, but from microalgae as well, right? Actually, one of the insights in developing this technology is that we first try to obtain exosomes from microalgae that are naturally produced by them. But there's another challenge, not just the biocommunication aspect, which is the scalability, right? The amount about on which these exosomes are produced is very low. So to create an active ingredient that it's potent enough, that it's concentrated enough with these vesicles, and that it's not super expensive, it's pretty much impossible when using those type of platforms, right? So yes, they exist. However, very tough to translate into an active ingredient.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, next question is, are exosomes classed as nanoproducts or in another category?
That's a good question. So and the animal-derived exosomes, they range from 50 nanometers to 150, 170 nanometers. So of course, everything that's below 100 nanometers could be considered potentially as nano. However, these actives, these constructs being vesicles, right, being lipid-based vesicles, they are not persistent molecules. They will not be considered as nanoparticles because they basically degrade when they reach their target into the skin, right? So they will not have this persistency.
Okay, great. So they are not nanomaterials. Perfect. Next question we have is, what is the difference between exosomes and peptide functions?
Yeah, so this is kind of what I answered when I was presenting the technology itself, which I think it's a good point, which peptides, they have this targeting ability built in, right? You can synthesize specific peptides that can dock with specific receptors in our skin cells, while exosomes have peptides or these proteins built in their membrane, right? So it's not just the signaling that a peptide will deliver. It's not just the activation of the receptor, but actually it's going to be the cargo, right? The load of the exosome, in which once the vesicle reaches the recipient cell, it will open up and deliver all these amazing actives to it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to a formulation-based question. Okay, so we have a question that talks around the stability. So what is the stability of exosomes in stock bottle and also stability in emulsions, please?
I'll go with this one. So basically, Exometics G has a shelf life of 12 months. So this was just launched in April. So of course we're trying to expand it to 24 months. For now, it's 12 months. It's going to be perfectly stable in suspension. So these are just the vesicles in suspension in water. And in emulsions, as Marina mentioned, we've done some searing, some homogenizing tests. Basically, the vesicles are robust enough to withstand 8,000 RPM when homogenizing emulsions, right? So the vesicles are even more stable than normal liposomes according to our stability test. And this is because the amount of pressure we use to create them. So I think there was another question in here, which was asking why are they so stable, or basically because of the process itself, which uses a high amount of energy, a high amount of pressure to create those vesicles. So these are very robust vesicles, and you need a lot of energy to break them, right? So that's why they can withstand this huge amount of shearing without breaking.
Thanks, Jordi. Yes, there was that follow-up question as well around what makes them so stable. Okay, we have another question here. Does one type of exosome resolve multiple skin problems or require a specific type of exosome?
That's a good question, and then I will come back to this poll in which there were some people that said I understand everything about exosomes, because we don't understand everything about exosomes yet, right? And the thing is that these are very complex structures. The composition depends not just from organism to organism, but within an organism from a tissue or from a cell type to another cell type, right? So of course they are multifunctional, as we've seen. I mean, our Exometics, it has this skin renewal benefit, but also it works on hyperpigmentation, right? So of course they will have more than one efficacy, but I think it's not just focusing on types of performance, but it's also focusing on types of delivery, right? So I think one of the key features that this exosome trend have opened up for us as a suppliers of active ingredients is that create actives that are targeting different skin layers, right? So we've talked about Exometic G as a biomimetic exosome that's copying fibroblast exosome, right? So of course it goes to the dermis, but imagine having this hypothermal targeting or epidermal targeting featuring keratinocyte targeting exosomes or adipocyte targeting exosomes, right? So they're not that specific, but I think it gives us this amazing opportunity of creating targeted technologies, which will have, we hope, specific benefits when talking about skincare.
Great, thank you. And then I think final question. I know there are other questions that have come through that we'll be able to answer offline and share the answers with after the webinar. But final question for today is how do consumer perceptions of exosomes affect marketing claims? Because exosomes are trending and are used a lot by brands, but are they really being adopted by consumers? So I think this really goes to the point of how do we communicate the skin communication technologies? The brands know that they're a trending ingredient. We're seeing a lot in the media around exosomes, but do consumers really understand what exosomes are, what they do for the skin, and the benefits that they can provide? Is there almost a gap between the brand and the consumers? Probably yes, because the science is quite complex, and for me, it would be trying for a brand to really try and educate their consumer with that scientific perspective. But Marina, Jordi, do you believe that there's, I guess, a bit of a gap to be addressed between the marketing claims that the brands are marketing with versus what the consumer is understanding an exosome can do?
I'll go first, and then I'll let Marina intervene. I think this is one of these trends, and I remember at the beginning, maybe 2 years ago, I remember talking to brands that they were asking us for exosomes, right? And I remember asking them, what do you want them for? What do you think they do? And they were like, we don't know. We have marketing asking us to create, to launch an exosome infused product, right? So I think this is one of the few trends that consumers are aware of before we were aware of this trend, right? So I think there's an opportunity for brands to really bridge that gap between the need and the content, right? It's now all about educating. I think the concept resonates with the consumer. They know the word, they maybe don't know what they are, right? So I think now it's a great opportunity for brands to jump in this trend and really educate the consumer with, of course, reliable and scientifically backed content.
Thank you.
I don't know if Marina has.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it brings us back a little bit to the gray zone or the lack of regularity. Because even in education, you need to understand how you can educate people about specific claims. Because if you're saying that exosomes do this or that, and by this or through this or through that, you are also saying that your product are doing that. So it's also very common that new technologies that are pulled from the market are ahead of regularity and even ahead of us, like Jordi is just saying. So I think now it's a matter of time, and that's the moment to jump in, to get your public understand with you what is it. And then when you bring a product with it, consumers are ready to try it, feeling safe.
Great. Thank you very much, Marina. So that brings us to the end of our Q&A session. And I know there are a lot more questions in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to answer those offline and hopefully share perhaps a document where those answers can be shared with all of the attendees of today's webinar. I think just to wrap up, a few key takeaways, at least from my side, is not all exosomes are created equally. There are various exosomes in the market. So you've got the vegan biomimetic exosomes. We've talked about almost the exosomes that aren't really exosomes. We've got the animal derived. There is definitely a gap between what we can say about exosomes and what we can claim versus what exosomes are actually doing within the skin and their benefits. But obviously there is a balanced approach that needs to be taken just because of regulatory compliance. There are, I guess, a few points to consider when it comes to formulating and how easy Exometics G is to formulate with. And I'm sure Jordi will be able to share samples if you request those through emails that you can see on the screen there. This webinar has been recorded and a replay will be available on YouTube soon. And you will also receive an email from Covalo with all of the information on how to follow up with us if you have any questions. And that will also include a link to Algaktiv's Exometics G, so you can easily request a sample from there. If you do have any further questions with regards to Exometics G, probably best to reach out to Jordi. His email is on screen there. Formulation, please reach out to Marina. And anything regulatory compliance claims, please reach out to myself. And we will do our best to get back to you and hopefully answer your questions as well. It's been a pleasure talking through exosomes and the next generation of ingredients that we're seeing in cosmetics. And thank you to Marina and Jordi for joining the webinar and sharing their insights as well. Marina, Jordi, I don't know if you have any final words. Go to Marina first.
I just want to say thank you, Kamal, for introducing and guiding us today. And thank you, Jordi, and everybody,
Covalo
and all the attendants that are there. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Great. Thank you very much, everyone.